Silence fills the concert hall in Berlin. There is an oppressive atmosphere in the room. A sense of helplessness and disappointment spreads among the attendant crowd. Many people have gathered on this 23rd of February of 2012 in memory of the victims killed by neo-Nazis. Their lives were snuffed out and their dreams with them. Many have tears in their eyes. The silence is interrupted by a father who lost his son. Ismail Yozgat steps to the pulpit. He's not asking for compensation money, he says. His wish is that the perpetrators will get punished and that the street where his son was born and murdered will be renamed in his honor. Not everybody can be bought with money. The pain caused by the loss of a loved one and the massive false suspicions by German authorities following the murder cannot be recompensed with money. Then our Chancellor Angela Merkel asks this question in her speech. How could this happen? Why did we not take notice any earlier? Why could we not prevent this from happening? She continues, the right-wing extremists acted with unfathomable contempt for human dignity, and yet we must try to find out how and through whom they became that way. We must do everything we can to prevent other young men and women from growing up to harbor such contempt for human dignity.
In order to answer this question, we would like to shed some light on the main source of anti-Semitism in Germany. Anti-Semitism has existed long before National Socialism. It is the year 1483. It is the transition from the Middle Ages to the modern age, a time of drastic changes. Just shy of midnight, on November the 10th, a child is born. Nobody knows that this newborn boy would later become a dark figure of light and change Germany in an unprecedented way. The child is given the name Martin Luther. In the year of 1517, this self-proclaimed Luther begins to operate publicly. He starts a movement and develops it into the institution of the Lutheran Church.
Various myths have been spread about the life and work of Martin Luther. They cannot change the fact that he was a hate preacher through and through. His own publications confirm this fact in a shocking way. There has never been a preacher before or after him throughout the religious scene of Germany who could compare to him in that respect. The theology of his very own approach on love thy neighbor revolutionized the Germans' attitude. German history proves what kind of havoc Luther's beliefs were able to wreak.
Luther was, is, and will be the pioneer of German anti-Semitism. His writings are proof for his destructive reformation. Luther said, German ears ring with this phrase, which is often referenced. You will now hear a selection of statements he made in his sermons. Listen and see for yourself how target-oriented the reformer operated. Luther said, "Fie on you here and fie on you there, and where you are, you damned Jews. You should only read the Bible that is under the tail of the sow and gorge and gulp the letters that fall out of there." The Jews are such a despaired, malicious, poisonous thing that they have been our plague, pestilence, and all misfortune for 1400 years, and still are. Summa, we have true devils in them. First, to set fire to their synagogues or schools, in honor of our Lord and Christendom, so that God might see that we are Christians, and to destroy and shatter their houses likewise. Therefore, wherever you see a genuine Jew, you may with a good conscience cross yourself and bluntly say, "There goes a devil incarnate." If I baptize a Jew, I will take him to the Alps bridge, tie a stone around his neck and throw him off of there and say, I baptize you in the name of Abraham. If anyone hears of a Jew, he shall report him to the authorities or throw sow dung at him when he sees him and chase him away. And let nobody be merciful or kind herein, for it concerns the honor of God and all of our, also the Jews' salvation. Come near for the kiss. The devil has shit his pants and again emptied the stomach. This is the right sanctuary that the Jews and whoever is wanting to be a Jew should kiss. Gorge, drink, and worship, and the devil himself shall also gorge and drink what his disciples vomit and discharge from mouth and bottom. The devil now gorges with his angel snout and gorges with lust that the Jews' upper and lower mouth vomits and sputters. In one of his table talks, Luther gives the following reply to the question wherever it is permitted to beat a Jew. Of course, I would slap one in the face. If I could, I would strike him down and pierce him with my sword in my wrath. Burn their synagogues, force them to labor, and treat them with all ruthlessness.
I grew up as a daughter of a Lutheran pastor, was baptized as a baby, attended Sunday school, and was confirmed by my father as a teenager. Besides learning all the church traditions, all I learned about Luther were the well-known myths about the Reformer. To me, he was the good and brave Reformer who had dared to nail his thesis to the church door. I was convinced that Martin Luther had given us a better church. What a fallacy. Nobody ever told me about Luther's misanthropy, neither in Sunday school nor in confirmation classes. Religion and history classes in school did not deal with the topic either. My father kept the true Luther a secret from me. When I realized that I had been religiously defrauded, I drew the obvious conclusion and resigned from the Lutheran Church. When I hear the church bells ring today, they remind me of the Luther illusion and all the suffering he brought on so many people.
Luther's next target: Baptists, Mennonites, Anabaptists, and other spirit-filled Christians. The blood of 1,000 Anabaptists is on Luther's hands. Luther called them with the derogatory terms clouded mind, mizzled utopians, deluded spirits, skulkers, furtive preachers, and Anabaptists. Anabaptists literally means those who baptize again, which was prohibited under state church rule. Georg Wagner von Emmering is one of the oldest martyrs of Luther's day. He was one of the great preachers of the so-called Baptist movement. On February the 8th of 1527 he was burned alive at the stake in Munich. In the year after that, Hans Feierer, a successor of Georg Wagner, was burned publicly along with 5 fellow believers. Their wives were first drowned, then burned. One of the most influential leaders of the Baptist movement, Balthasar Hubmaier, was burned in Vienna. 3 days later, his wife was thrown into the river Danube with a stone fastened to her body. These examples represent the historically proven fate of more than 1,000 Christians. In Luther's opinion, Anabaptists deserved death. Think about it, Anabaptists were later called Baptists. Luther said, and a citizen is obligated, where such a skulker comes to him, before he listens to such a one, to report him to his authorities and to the priest of whom he is parishioner. Therefore, the authorities are obligated to punish the obstinate ones. They are Anabaptists or others, with physical violence and, as the circumstances allow, also with the sword. If he wants to preach or teach, he shall prove the ordination or the mandate that drives or compels him. Otherwise he shall be silent. If he is not willing, let the authorities hand such a one over the right master, called Master Hans. Master Hans is a synonym for executioner here. This is how Luther paved the way for the culture of denunciation in Germany. At the same time, he set the standards for the German Evangelical Alliance to discredit spirit-filled Christians as misled utopians.
In my parents' home, I was exposed to the contempt with which they spoke about faith preachers like Reinhard Bonke, Benny Hinn, Kenneth Hagin, Oral Roberts, Steve Hill, and Katharina Siegling. My father often made me read defamatory articles from state church magazines to destroy the credibility of these preachers. As a Lutheran pastor, he refused to check the validity of these hostile allegations. With deep, heartfelt disappointment, I had to find out how my father, along with sect commissioners and other Lutherans from the Bayreuth parish St. Georgen, faithfully followed Luther's inhuman doctrine on dissidence. He expected others to follow what he thought to be the right things to believe. Because of that, my husband and I were forced to marry in his church, the Lutheran Church of St. Georgen in Bayreuth. While he condemned others, he cooperated in his parish with church staff who had openly confessed to be atheists in their former homeland of Romania and had been leaders of the Communist Party and Securitate collaborators. Their job had been to denunciate others to the police and the Securitate, which they did to facilitate their own emigration from Romania. They projected their own deceitful past onto the life of Katharina Siegling by pinning a false biography on her.
Luther's next target, the peasants. Luther said, "Let whoever can stab, smite, slay. If you die in doing it, good for you. A more blessed death can never be yours. Therefore, let everyone who can smite, slay, and stab, secretly or openly, remembering that nothing can be more poisonous, hurtful, or devilish than a rebel. It is just as when one must kill a mad dog." Luther legitimizes the murder of thousands of peasants with his own interpretation of God's will. Luther said, "I have killed all peasants in the rebellion. All their blood is on my neck, but I blame it on our Lord God. He has commanded me to speak these things."
Maybe Luther's words will startle some farmers from their church pew, at least nowadays. No wonder that the real Luther is rather brushed under the carpet. Who then would pay church taxes anymore if they knew how Luther degraded other people? Foreigners were another target of Luther's verbal attacks.
He appeals for war against the Turks and murder. Luther said, "And use his fist with gladness and beat, murder, rob, and do harm as much as they like, with a clear conscience." Luther's next target, the handicapped. In his table talks, he said that the devil foisted changelings and monstrosities and advised to drown such a child. Luther said, "He's not your son, but the devil himself in person. Take the good for nothing and cast him into the water. Therefore, throw away this foul offspring without any hesitation." He called handicapped people nothing but pieces of flesh without a soul.
Luther's atrocious image of humanity confirmed to me once more that it had been right to leave the state church. After that, I experienced disadvantages in my job as a kindergarten teacher. Nursery schools, daycare centers, and children's homes are largely controlled by the state church. Even though the government finances 85%, job applicants who are not state church members are disadvantaged in the application procedure. This is false labeling and discrimination.
The collaboration between the government and the state church is nothing new. German history proves that well-known statesmen put Luther's hate propaganda into practice. Their quotations agree with Luther's way of thinking and comments with incredible accuracy. Here are some examples. Friedrich II, also known as Friedrich the Great or the Old Fritz, said the following: "The Jews are the most dangerous of all sects, and one must prevent their number from growing." By that, Friedrich II established the age-long German tradition of inquisitorial persecution of so-called sects, which lasts even until today, but we will go into that later. Otto von Bismarck said the following: "I do not allow the Jews to dominate the press, to obtain political key positions, or to take an office of authority." The resigned German Emperor Wilhelm II of Prussia wrote from his exile in August 1919 to the General von Mackensen that the Germans had been ensnared and driven by the tribe of Judah, which they hated. No German shall ever forget that, nor rest until those parasites have been eliminated and exterminated from German soil. This poisonous mushroom on the German oak, he continued writing to the general, Jews and mosquitoes are a plague, of which mankind should free itself in one way or another. He suggested the method of eliminating the Jews. I think the best thing would be gas. Luther's way of thinking began to slowly penetrate German society and culture. Historical occasions are culminating in the city of Bayreuth. It all starts in 1872 when composer Richard Wagner settles in Bayreuth. In 1850, Richard Wagner publishes his writing Judaism in Music. To add authority to his words, the writing was published again in 1869. Richard Wagner says, "I cannot judge whether the downfall of our culture may be halted through the violent ejection of the destructive and foreign element." He means the Jews and everything Jewish, because powers would be needed for that, of which I don't know if they exist. The desire for political force becomes evident in Richard Wagner's words. He wants to have an executor who would take action against the Jews. Wagner closes by directly threatening the Jews with a terrible end. Consider that only one thing can be your salvation from the curse which is upon you, the salvation of Ahasuerus, the extinction. Richard Wagner's wish came true. Houston Stewart Chamberlain, son-in-law of Cosima Wagner, became the pathfinder for the executor that Wagner was longing for. When he settled in the Wagner residence, he significantly helped connecting Luther's anti-Semitism with Wagner's music. Hitler could count on the Wagner support because of his personal relationship with the Wagner family. Goebbels admired Chamberlain as father of our spirit, pioneer and pathfinder. The anti-Semite Chamberlain said the following about the Jews: "Not only the Jew, but everything that comes from the Jewish spirit gnaws away and corrupts the best which is in us." Hitler names the source of his ideology in 1923. Luther was a great man, a giant. With force he broke through the dawn. He saw the Jew as we only now begin to see him. Hitler told the Catholic Bishop Wilhelm Berning in 1936, "I only do what the Church has already been doing for 1500 years, however more thoroughly."
In the night of the 9th of November of 1938, Luther's prophecy began to come true. The terror against the Jews reached its first peak in Nazi Germany. The so-called Kristallnacht was devoted to the honored reformer as a birthday present. Luther's hatred tirades against the Jews were put into practice. In assaults, at least 91 Jews were beaten and killed in the streets. Another 30,000 Jews were deported and imprisoned in concentration camps. Jewish houses, hospitals, and schools were plundered and destroyed with the sledgehammers by the Nazis. More than 1,000 synagogues were burned. More than 7,000 Jewish stores were destroyed or damaged.
When the synagogues were burned to the ground, the Protestant Lutheran Church published a new edition of Luther's inflammatory pamphlet on the Jews and their lies. The preface was written by the Protestant regional bishop Martin Sasse. He triumphs with the following words: "On Luther's birthday, on the 10th of November 1938, the synagogues are burning in Germany." In this hour, the voice of the man who was a prophet in the 16th century must be heard. It was ignorance that first made him to be a friend of the Jews, but driven by his conscience, by his experiences, and by the reality, he became the greatest anti-Semite of his time, the one who warned his people of the Jews. This was written in the preface of a church paper for Mecklenburg in the year 1938.
In the post-war years, a new image was urgently needed for the reformer. The anti-Semite Luther as church founder was not palatable anymore. The Protestant Church altered his biography. We get back to the questions our society is dealing with. How could this happen? Why did we not take notice any earlier? Why could we not prevent this from happening? And let me add another question. Why is our society blind in the right eye?
An inquiry of anti-Semitism commissioned by the German Bundestag proves that 1 of every 5 Germans is at least a latent anti-Semite. Anti-Semites are misanthropists. They are despisers of mankind, racists, antagonists of the Jews, women haters and xenophobes. They are in the midst of us. It can be the neighbor you meet in the supermarket, the mother who takes her children to school in the morning, the teacher of religion, the doctor, the journalist, the public official, the policeman, the professor, the politician, and so on. You can find them in cities and in villages, in all educated classes, in all age levels, and in all income groups. It's not only the skinheads who spread terror publicly, but also the invisible misanthropists who pose a threat. The excrescence of this contempt for human dignity is evident in the murders of the right-wing terrorists Zwickauer Zelle.
How could this happen? Why did we not take notice any earlier? Why could we not prevent this from happening? Now, let us look at further aspects and see how the contempt for human dignity is reproducing unnoticed in our society. Listen to the following.
Professor Kriele, Emeritus Professor for General Political Science and Public Law and former judge at the Constitutional Court of North Rhine-Westphalia, today counts as one of the leading constitutional law experts in Germany. As early as in the year of 1996, Professor Kriele writes, "What should have shaken up the minds long ago?" He writes about the fascistic traits of the sect Hand. Fascistic means anti-democratic. Fascistic means organized according to the Führer principle. Kriele's admonitions are abundantly clear. He describes the sect hunt in our time, the violation of human rights, the hatred for people with different faith. A typically fascistic element is their aggression against defenseless minorities. The commissioners for sect issues become raving mad whenever they encounter people whose convictions deviate from the prevailing trend, taking advantage of their defenselessness, making them objects of contempt, jeering and ridiculing them, endeavoring to educate mere school children to marginalize and reject them. And further, another fascist feature of the campaign being waged against sects is the unawareness of the law. For example, the countless attempts at undermining, evading or violating the legal rules that are supposed to protect minorities. These include the disregard or the violation of the data protection laws, the indoctrination and manipulation of judges at the Academy of Judiciary, etc. And further, a typical symptom of fascist terror is that groups which are affected themselves keep their distance to other sects and become involved in the campaigns against these other sects in the hopes of getting on the right side of the sect hunters. Well, meanwhile, even leaders of Pentecostal and charismatic churches, formerly derided as sects, have adapted this code of behavior. Amazingly, even these hope to be accepted by the sect commissioners. Let me continue to quote. Another typically fascist element is the endeavor to create divisions in groups and to incite them to attack each other. And further, sect is another word for heretic, and what held for heretics in the past also holds today in Germany once more. Exterminandus est. If not by fire, then by defamation, isolation and economic destruction. It is obvious how the old Fritz, Friedrich II, determined our society's direction 250 years ago, when he said, of all sects, the Jews are the most dangerous and one has to prevent their number from growing. Basically, nothing has changed throughout history.
The behavior of children and adolescents is formed at an early stage, most of all in the parents' home and also at school. Children adopt their behavior from good and bad examples alike. If our today's generation sets an example of contempt for human dignity, children and adolescents will adopt this attitude. Since they have not reached maturity, they are easily influenced, as we can see in one of many examples. A summer night in Weidenberg. Teenagers defile the outer facade of a building. They throw bottles and stones. The building is damaged. The police investigates. Further acts of revenge follow. Bottles burst on the parking lot. Power cables are ripped out. The doorbell is destroyed. Now it is winter in Weidenberg. Teenagers draw a swastika in the snow, adding the words, "Fucking sect."
Some of the students were caught and questioned by the police. They gave the reasons for their behavior. They had been taught in Lutheran religious education at school that their victim was supposedly a dangerous sect. Their teacher of religion, a former university chaplain, doctor of theology and private lecturer, his name is well known to the editorial team, has informed his students about this topic at the Richard Wagner Gymnasium. This is an academic high school in Bayreuth.
Can it be a coincidence that Luther's spirit is reflected in such a way at the Richard Wagner Gymnasium in Bayreuth of all schools? Such scenes remind us of Luther's agitation against the Jews and the vandalism against the Jews in the Kristallnacht.
Why are lower leaders of society and politics blind in the right eye? The answer is at hand. The state church penetrates politics and state. Virtually every politician is involved in a state church. As long as there is no consequent separation between state and church, nothing will change, and Luther's mindset will be adopted by the next generation. Children will be misinformed by teachers who get their information from sect commissioners, and they will be brought up to hold others in contempt and educated to despise others. An appeal of renowned professors and scientists disapproves of the recommendations of the Enquete Commission, which scrutinized new religious movements by order of the German Bundestag. In their press release of the 28th of May 1998, the retired German federal minister Professor Dr. Hans Apel Professor Dr. Dr. Gerhard Bessier, Professor Dr. Niels Bierbaumer, Professor Dr. Martin Kriele, Professor Dr. Hermann Lübbe, and Professor Dr. Erwin Scheuch disapproved of the recommendations of the Enquete Commission. Moved by serious concern, they appealed to the German people. We asked the German population neither to be impressed by the new mental monopoly and control claim, nor to be contaminated by the heretic hysteria of the sect hunters, nor to participate in the demonization of minorities or to denunciate others, because they take part in meetings of this or that group. However, hardly anyone paid attention to this warning.
Misanthropy and contempt for human dignity begins in the everyday life, with the words that are spoken and with the words that are accepted in the personal environment. The misanthropic and inhuman spirit of Luther subverts the values of our society. Silence finally turns into acceptance, be it due to cowardice, ignorance, or indifference. At first, it might only affect the other, the Turk, the Jew, the black person, the one with a different religion, faith, or mentality. In the end, you might be the target. Evil prevails only when good people fail to act. And one more thought at the end. How about unfeigned love for the Turks? Love for the Jews? Love for the blacks? Love for the strangers? Love for those who think differently, love for those with a different religion. How about being able to live out your own human rights in a democracy without facing discrimination?